It's December 25th, 1996, in rural Lavernia, Texas. You and your 3 children are spending your very first Christmas together as a single parent. You are excited to go to your family Christmas party later on that evening. The party comes and goes, but you are nowhere to be found and are never seen again.
Today we're going to be talking about the case of Patty Vaughan and her disappearance. She was initially born Patricia Inez Brightwell to Patsy Wallace and Billy Brightwell, and she was born on August 17, 1964. Growing up, Patty was described to be fun, loving, caring, and a protector to all, especially her sisters. One of her favorite things to do was to sing. She actually was in the choir, and she stayed in this choir all the way through to when she was a teenager. And during this time of her life, when she became a teenager, she actually started dating a boy named Gary. Gary was somebody who she was extremely intrigued by. She was very excited to see where things went with him, but unfortunately this romance between them wouldn't last very long because he was approached by his ex-girlfriend who he had been seeing prior to Patty, and she informed him that she had actually become pregnant. And so Gary wanted to do the right thing, the noble thing, and actually marry her. He couldn't deny his feelings for Patty and his attraction to her, but he knew that he was going to be having a child with somebody else. So they spoke about it and they actually agreed to break up, and that romance, it didn't last very long. It was very short. But you know, Patty, as any teenager, especially I remember as a teen, your heart starts to become so involved with people. So with this relationship ending, she actually didn't let it get her down. She just threw herself into her studies, and she graduated from high school in June of 1982 in Okinawa. Shortly after she graduated, she did start seeing another guy. His name was Jerry Ray Vaughan. He went by JR. And it was this whirlwind romance. She and him just immediately connected. They clicked. They seemed at that time to be on the same wavelength, and they got engaged shortly after, and then they were married in San Antonio on May 18th of 1985. Now, in their early years of marriage, due to JR's work, he did work in construction, and I remember my dad working in construction tends to make you move around quite a bit, and that's actually what happened to them. They moved around from Portland to Virginia to Georgia, back to San Antonio, so they were just constantly on the move. So for the first couple years, that's really what they did. She just followed him around while he was moving. Patty had always wanted to be a mother. She was extremely nurturing. Her sisters, like I said, they explained her to be their protector. And that is just something that she truly felt like she was just destined to do, was to have children. So it is no surprise that after the first couple years of marriage, they did end up having a little baby girl. Her name was Brittany. She was born on August 20th of 1987, and then a year later on September 8th, she gave birth to a little baby boy, and they named him Ray. And then shortly after that, she ended up giving birth to her last child, who was named Tyler, and Tyler was born on August 29th of 1980. Wow, that's a lot of August birthdays, so kudos for August, I guess. It's a popular month for people to have children. Her children were only 9, 8, and 6 years old at the time of her disappearance, so they were extremely young, which is so heartbreaking to think. Like, I don't know, I just remember my childhood all the way back to when I was 6 years old, so you have memories. So anyways, Patty and JR decided to set their roots back in San Antonio. So they actually moved just outside of San Antonio to a little town called Lavernia. It had a population of only 700 people, which is insanely small. I mean, I know there's probably smaller towns, but oh my gosh, that's so tiny. So they bought a house that was located on Oak Park Road, and once they got settled into their home, JR actually requested of Patty to stay home with the children and be a stay-at-home mom, so that way they didn't have to pay for daycare. And for her, I think she just saw this as an opportunity to just throw herself into being such a wonderful mom to her children. She was there for them in every aspect that she could be. And in addition to that, she actually was super involved in her church, and she joined her church choir. She had a role in the choir, and it was just, she said it felt like this was her calling, that she held that position in the choir at such a high standard. It was just probably, like, next to her children, her second love. And on top of this, her family just said she had the most beautiful singing voice, which, what a freaking gift. Like, I honestly wish that I could sing, but I cannot, so I film instead. From the outside looking in, you would probably think they are your typical suburban happy family, and they did tend to put that out there. You know, you do always show just the best of your life. You don't always let people in on the actual struggles that are going on. And they had children, so of course they had to keep up looks, but they were not happy at all. It is said that JR could be extremely controlling, that he had a temper. One time her family explains that there was a gathering of some sort, and he ended up throwing a glass jar, which either had like mayo or some kind of condiment in it, at the wall. Like, out of anger, he just chucked this glass in front of people. Like, he didn't care that people were there. He just threw it at the wall. Like, I don't know. It's scary to me. I don't know. I don't have outbursts, so maybe that's why. And it is crazy because while all of this was going on, she just threw herself into her children. She was your, like, typical perfect soccer mom, and she even let her sister come stay with her for a little while. And her sister said that while she was there, she was just such a great mom to the children, and she took care of them, and even took care of her. Like, she said that she'd like make curtains, homemade curtains, pack their lunches, ask them how their day was, like sit and do their homework with them. And I just, like, what an amazing mom. Like, that is just such a beautiful soul to have, like a mom that actually throws herself into her children like that. So like I said, from the outside looking in, it really truly did seem like they had it all, but their marriage problems did start to weigh on her. They started to affect her individually. Like, her individuality just faded, and her family saw this. She just was not the same Patty that they had grown up with and loved so much ever since she had met JR. And they knew that something was going on. They said that, according to them, that she had been dealing with physical and mental abuse from JR himself. That she would show up to family gatherings with suspicious bruises. She would always make excuses for what they were from, but just as your family, you know better. And over time, things just grew increasingly worse in the household. So, you know, she did what any brave mother would do, and she stood up to JR and actually asked for a separation. She just had enough at this point, and how brave of her to stand up for herself and her children. I know it can be so scary when you're in an abusive relationship, especially like the mental ones. From personal experience, it's so hard, like, to get yourself out of that mindset, but she did it. She told him that she wanted a separation. He ended up actually moving out, and he signed a 1-year lease for this apartment in San Antonio, and she kept the house in order to be able to have the kids there. And being a single mom does mean that you have to provide for them. So she actually was so excited because she got to go get her job for the first time since high school. She went and got a job at a local electric company called Corny Electric. And at this time, things were looking up for Patty. She had her own job, she was newly single, she was loving the time that she was having with her children, and still partaking in her duties at the choir for her church. So it is no surprise she's so beautiful that she actually ended up dating again. And you know, a lot of people would probably look at this as an issue, as far as like the time frame from when she split up to when she started dating again. But the thing is the person that she started dating was, would you not believe this, it was Gary from all those years ago. Gary had actually ended up divorcing his wife, and he had a separation, and had already gone through when he started seeing Patty, and she just felt like the stars aligned for them, because you think all these years this is the first person that she started seeing romantically, and she felt like it was so unfinished between them. And now all these years later, they have children, they had this whole other life, and I mean, the fates, like, could you imagine? Like, oh my gosh, so adorable. Now, she was so excited about this relationship with Gary. She was not at all secretive about it. She was very out there with this relationship. She actually ended up taking him to a holiday Christmas party that her family had thrown. And her family just said that they could see the light coming back into her eyes. She was just so excited about everything. And he gave her a heart pendant at that party, and it just is something that she truly cherished. She was definitely like falling in love with him, and it was visible to everybody. Now, unfortunately, this is a small town, so they actually had gone out to dinner at some point. It's not sure when, but to a local Dairy Queen. And while they were at dinner, they were seen by somebody who was in like the congregation of her church, and they saw her with Gary, and they knew that she was married. And even though they knew that she was separated, for some reason this was just an issue for them. So they actually went and told the preacher or leader of the church that they had witnessed this in public and that she was out. And so later that night after her dinner, like, this is how fast small towns move. And I shit you not, like, it is wild, because shortly after this sighting at the Dairy Queen, she goes to choir practice, and she's in choir practice, and both of these men come in and they just start like pointing their fingers at her, and they're like, you don't deserve this role in the choir, and you're for your behavior, kind of telling her, basically knocking her for moving on with her life. Like, she's separated from JR, so therefore, like, there shouldn't be an issue. But these people in this church, and I don't mean it to be like these people, but like specifically these gentlemen in this church had an issue, and so they degraded her in front of her church, kicked her out of the choir, and she was not only heartbroken but mortified. Like, how embarrassing for somebody just to come chew you out like they're your parent or something. Anyways, she didn't let it get her down though. She did not. She actually just threw herself into her relationship. Surprise there. Like, she is just such a strong woman. Like, I aspire to be that strong one day. So moving forward, this was around the holidays, and this was going to be her first holiday as a single mom, and also for the children, the first holiday that they didn't have their parents together. So her and JR actually discussed it, and they had agreed to be able to have the children open presents, have JR come over to the house. They were going to do it all together at the house. They were going to hang out later. They were going to have a brunch. And then afterwards, they were going to go their separate ways. She actually had this big family dinner that she was going to be going to her sister's house for. Yeah, that's how it was supposed to go, but it did not go that way at all. And sadly, like, this is her last day that we know of, and her, like, being accounted for. It is said that on Christmas Eve, she received a call from her sister, and her sister explained that she had seemed distraught, that she was crying, and she said that her and Jerry had been fighting all day and she wasn't feeling very good, so she was needing to just get some rest and hopefully feel better the next day. So the next day on Christmas, the Christmas party actually had come up that evening that she was supposed to be going to with her family, and she never showed up. So the family called her house, and who answers? None other than JR. And he explains that that whole day that they had been fighting about Gary, and she just had had enough, and she grabbed her keys, left her children with him on Christmas Day, got in her car to go see Gary. And she just hadn't been seen since. She hadn't returned. Her family knew that this was a crock of crap, because there's no way that she would spend her very first Christmas with her children as a single mom with Gary. She wouldn't leave her children with him, first of all, and just ditch for some guy. She's not that type of mom. She was very involved in her children's life, so that's extremely unusual that she would do that. So her family really couldn't do much at that point. They just kind of like hoped that she was with Gary, and it's not really said what they were doing in the meantime, if they had called it around or whatnot. But the very next day, they actually did try and get a hold of her, and they couldn't get a hold of her. So then they go to Gary, and they explain to Gary, like, hey, you know, we've been trying to get a hold of her, but like nobody can find her or has heard from her. We're told that she came to your house. And he told them that he hadn't seen her, that he had actually had his own plans, and he hadn't heard from her since the previous time that they had hung out at the Christmas party. So obviously this not only worries the family, but now Gary is worried. He's so concerned about her. He like very much cared for this woman. I won't say he loved her because it's not said, but like it's obvious he cared for her. So her cousin actually went to the police department to go and report her as missing, and the police told her, you know, she's an adult, she can do whatever she wants. She chose to leave, so you know there's really no report we can file at this point, at least not for 72 hours. Now I know in today's like time that you do not have to wait 24 hours or 72 hours to report somebody missing. Like you can report them missing the moment that you feel like they are missing. It is definitely up to like you and how you know a person, which is like honestly, like I get that because sometimes I do go off the grid, but also I always respond to my texts. I always call my family. I always let them know what I'm doing. So if they felt like I was missing and they're like, this isn't normal for her, then I definitely want police to go off of what my family feels versus what they feel, because every single person is so different, you know? So anyways, they tell her that she has to wait the 72 hours. She can't report her missing. So this obviously like stresses them out, but they're listening to the police. This is the law enforcement. So obviously they just have to trust them. But later on that afternoon at 1:30 p.m. on December 26th, Patty's car was actually found abandoned on the side of the highway. At the time, she drove a light blue Dodge Caravan, and it was found with the tire deflated. So it was her boss who actually found the car, and he thought this was weird because he didn't see it on his way into work, but he did see it on his way back. And Patty hadn't been to work, so he hadn't heard from her. So the fact that he saw her car here, the tire deflated, he just instantly felt like something was off. So he called 911 immediately. And when the cops got there, they definitely thought that something was odd because the car was like spotless. Like it was wiped clean of any existence. And she has children. So I'm sorry, but from being a nanny, like even just as a nanny, the cars get messy. It's impossible to keep up with. And so the fact that the car was spotless already is super suspicious. But they couldn't find any prints, like it had been wiped of all the prints. And also the carpet in the car, like it to the touch was wet. Like somebody had carpet cleaned it. Like there was a mess inside of it and stuff. In addition to the carpets being cleaned and the tire being deflated, like the cup holders still had like puddles of like water and solution in them from being cleaned. Her car keys, her purse, her wallet, none of that was found like anywhere near the vehicle or inside of the vehicle. And they also found like a men's jumpsuit, like work suit. It was red and it had the initials JM on the back of it, which police also thought was interesting. So due to all of like the suspicious things that were surrounding the vehicle, the police did actually decide to go ahead and dust it for prints. They tested it for blood. Because it had already been like wiped completely clean, they actually were only able to recover one solid fingerprint. And then also they found traces of blood in the backseat and on the door. So to police at this point, it had seemed to them that what happened was Patty got a flat tire on her way into work. She pulled over, and at that time she was attacked and taken. But the only issue with this is that there was no sign of a struggle. Like Patty, as you can see just from everything that we've talked about, she is a strong-willed individual. Like she would have put up a fight. She would not go down like silent. Like she'd be kicking, screaming, scratching, whatever she could do to get away, especially because she loved her children so much. So not only did that make sense, but also the flat tire, like if you have a flat tire, you probably blew a tire, or you had a nail in it that was slowly leaking or anything. But when they checked the tire, there was no puncture wound, there was no nail, there was nothing that would indicate that she got an unsuspected flat tire. They actually went ahead and filled it completely up with air, and none of the air was leaking out, which to them, this means that somebody purposely deflated that tire. So they took off the caps and they deflated it themselves. The other thing that was super suspicious is the car, where it was, like entirely around it, there was no disturbed dirt. Like there's traffic, like you're on the side of a highway, and she was only, I think it was like 15 minutes or something from her house. So like you're on the side of a highway, it's super heavy traffic, and there's no disturbed dirt, there's no footprints, there's no nothing around it. So for the police, like this definitely looked like it was staged, like something happened to her somewhere else, and then someone put this vehicle here to make it look like she was abducted at this specific site. It is obvious that whoever did this was trying to throw off police. Now immediately they knew that this was not just your average missing persons case. Like her family was so worried, and they were extremely vocal, and they reported it right away. Her vehicle has been found in suspicious instances. They have traces of blood and everything. So they immediately went straight into searching for her. They searched the surrounding areas for her. They got friends and family all involved in searching. Even Gary was super involved. He actually threw himself into the investigation to try and help. He offered to take a polygraph. He was super forthcoming about his information and everything. As far as an alibi, what he was doing. He cooperated with police and the family so very much. You could tell this man cared so much for her, and he was so sad that this had happened. Now, he was ruled out as a suspect almost immediately because of his alibi, and sadly a few years later he actually did die from a tragic accident. So to this day, he was never considered a person of interest in the disappearance of her. So police, needing to try and find out where she went, her timeline, what was going on, actually started interviewing all of the family and friends, which I don't know why they didn't do this initially, but they ended up going through and they were interviewing these people, and they found some pretty odd things. The first thing is they found out about that call with her sister, where she said that she was distraught and upset, and that she had been fighting with JR all day long. But her sister actually also informed him that she could hear JR in the background telling her to get off of the phone. Which honestly, anytime you hear that somebody is physically chewing somebody out and telling them to get off the phone, that's so worrisome, because then that's them controlling what they're doing. So anyways, that's one thing that happened. And the other thing is that they interviewed JR's sister, and she informed him that she had gone over to the house to have lunch with them as well on Christmas. And when JR answered the door, he told her that Patty was upstairs in the bedroom resting because she had a headache and she wasn't feeling very good. And he actually asked her if she wouldn't mind taking the children with her while they discussed, because they had been fighting about Gary. So he told his sister that it was so they could discuss their relationship and what they were going to do to salvage it. So she agreed, and she took the children with her on that day and left Patty alone with JR. Now, as we know, JR says, according to him, that Patty and him got in that fight, and she got in her car, she left and went to go see Gary. But to be honest, there's so much suspicion around JR. First thing, his behavior around the whole entire case is just weird. He didn't participate in any search for her at all. He didn't offer his DNA. He didn't offer to do a lie detector test or anything He never once offered for the children to provide their DNA. In fact, he actually would follow them to like their their school events, or like Sunday school, or whatever it was that they were doing. Anything that they were doing, he was right behind them so that nobody could talk to them without him present, as well as nobody could take their DNA or anything. And he just like basically cut off all ties from like anybody that wanted to question about her disappearance to the children, which I think is odd, because children see so much, they hear so much. Like, honestly, anytime anybody goes missing, that is like the initial thing that you would do, right? Is talk to the children, because they pick up on so much. Might be a little coded, but they pick up on quite a lot. The other thing is that her family actually gave JR a big stack of missing persons flyers, and they asked JR if he would help hand those out, like in his neighborhood, around his work, all of this stuff. And he took them from them. But later on, when they went to his house, I don't know exactly what it was for, but they saw that stack of flyers, like the exact stack of flyers, like not even one was missing probably to their eye, just sitting there. Like, who does that? Like, I am sorry, but like, this is the mother of your children. So regardless of your issues, regardless, like if you guys had a fight, like you would think that you would do everything possible for your kids' sake to be able to get their mother back in their lives. But he didn't. He just sat there. He said it was because he needed to be at home with the children, but that it can't even be an excuse. There's so many instances in so many other cases where there are single parents who have somebody go missing and they do everything that they possibly can do, but he did nothing. In fact, like, it almost seemed like he was doing whatever he could to make it harder. But that's just my opinion. But just like, honestly, just reading the facts about this case, it frustrates the heck out of me, because I'm like, why would you stall and not help at all? Like, blows my mind. And to add on to all of the freaking suspiciousness, he had contacted his landlord a week prior to Christmas and told them that he is no longer going to be needing his lease, that he's actually going to have to break it early because he is moving. But where are you, like, where was he going to be moving to? Like, maybe I'll give him the benefit of the doubt here. It is possible that he thought that they were just going to reconcile, because honestly, every marriage is rocky. So it is a possibility. But to end your lease and to tell them you have somewhere to go when in fact you do not is just super suspicious. The other thing that JR did was he erased her voice off of the voicemail machine, like 2 days after she had gone missing. Like, who does that? Like, you just literally, first of all, in my opinion, like, I would never get rid of that ever, because like the children, like that's all I keep coming back to, is like, so they could hear their mother's voice. But you literally erased her voice just to put your own on there. Why would you do that if you're expecting her to come home? The police also noticed all of the shadiness that was surrounding JR, and they were asking him, they're like, hey, we want to search your house. And he said, no, not without a warrant. And so what did they do? They went and got a warrant. So they come over to his house to search it. And of course his sister Marilyn's there, and she's just being like super protective of him and kind of like all up in the police's business. And she was asking questions, following them around, pretty much impeding how they do their job. And so because of this, they actually had to ask her to step outside while they finished. And they did everything. They took fingerprints, they were taking samples of the carpet, of the bed, everything that you could possibly think of. They were really getting into the nitty-gritty. So the results of this search of the house did show that they found traces of Patty's blood on the floor, on the wall, in the sink, in the master bathroom, as well as in a mop bucket, like on the mop and inside of the bucket downstairs. And like, honestly, even like, it's just so frustrating, because despite finding this blood on the mop bucket and in the bathroom and on the walls, like, they still did not arrest him. They didn't get a warrant for his arrest. They just ignored the fact, I guess, or maybe they just didn't have enough evidence. I have no idea what it was, but they didn't even arrest him because of this. They still let him live in the house. They did not block off the house as a full-on crime scene. They just let them continue living, continue like contaminating, because eventually touch DNA and everything, like it all adds up. And like the more time that goes on that you are living inside of a crime scene, the harder that specific crime is to prove. And they just let them keep living there. Like, what the heck? But the police did take, of course, the samples that they found in the house and the samples that they found in Patty's car, and they did compare them, and of course both of them did come back as a complete match to Patty. So it was her blood that was not only in the house but also in the vehicle. A few months later, police still had not gotten very far on the case, and Patty's mom, Patsy, was honestly, like, I don't blame her, but she was struggling. So she actually was arrested in February of 1997 for breaking into the house and attacking JR with a bat. This was her child, and she truly feels and believes that JR had something to do with her disappearance. Now, JR did manage to actually get full custody of the 3 children, and he cut off all ties to Patty's family, to the sisters, aunts, uncles, grandparents, like anybody who was related to Patty, he nixed out of their lives. So at the time of Patty's disappearance, of course, JR, he worked in construction, and he was working on the site of a middle school in Pleasanton, and it was about 40 minutes from their house, I want to say, but this specific location, like they were doing the groundwork for the elementary. You know, you usually start with concrete and then you build up from there. But his coworker said that he was being extremely like weird about it. His job title did not at all include him overseeing the pouring of the concrete, but they remembered him throwing a huge fit and wanting to be present during the pouring of the concrete. Like he wanted to make sure that he was watching them while they did this. And they thought that was extremely odd behavior for somebody who that was not their job. Like it was not in their title. My dad worked in concreting for years, and you are specifically assigned a job, and that is what you stick to. Like you don't go outside of it. It ruins the flow of everything. So like if you are told to do specific things, that is what you do, and that is it. So it is like no wonders that these guys, like after of course like the disappearance of his soon to be ex-wife, they start questioning like what the heck? Like that is so freaking sketchy. Like so sketchy to me. Now after a little bit of research, the police did find that the records show that the concrete was actually poured on December 21st, which would have been a few days before Christmas, which would mean it was prior to her disappearance. But honestly, records can be altered. Like we all know this. Like you can't just like always take it for what it looks like. But police did decide to actually go and search the school, you know, regardless of these records. So May of, I believe it was 1997, they did actually go through and search, and they did dig up the ground, and unfortunately even after bringing in dogs and everything, nothing had been found from that search. So the main thing that like the dogs do search for is methane, which if there was a decomposing body in the ground, then the dogs would have picked up on that scent. But like I said earlier, they didn't find anything, that the dogs did not catch on to anything that smelled like that. So sadly, this was a dead end for them. So 9 years after Patty's disappearance, he actually tried to have her declared dead so that way he could collect her life insurance. And honestly, like when you have somebody illegally declared dead, like it's such a heartbreaking thing, but obviously her family is going to know about this, and they said absolutely freaking not. Like they went ahead and they filed a wrongful death suit against him to be able to stop that. And luckily, like the courts did decide to be able to grant the life insurance. Like they made it so that way it was only given to the children and not JR himself. In 2006, the owner of a piece of property actually had contacted the authorities and informed them that around the time of Patty's disappearance, that the construction company that JR had been working for had actually been digging a pit, and they call this a trash pit, where they burn all the garbage and stuff in, near his house. So he let them know of like this suspicious activity. So they did actually go through and they took cadaver dogs to be able to, like I said, like these dogs, they have like insanely good smell. So they took them to see if they could catch on to anything. But the catch is that this specific area that they were checking was actually near a graveyard. So obviously, like, it just made the dogs go wild. They were struggling picking up a scent, like specifically for this instance. Like, you're right next to a graveyard, so obviously they're going to be picking up on everything else. Now, Patty's family did believe that she actually may have been buried in the backyard of their house on Oak Park Road. But unfortunately, the new owners of the house were not willing to be able to let the police dig to see if they could find anything in regards to her disappearance. And it wasn't until they left that they actually did agree to be able to let them dig and search for any signs of her. Which this did, of course, like make her family thankful that they were going to be able to search for her at this specific part, because they truly did believe that she was back there. They had a trash pit also dug back there in the backyard, and neighbors did report, it was Christmas Eve, that they heard some heavy machinery going on around there. So they really did believe that this is where he put her. In their minds, this is what had happened. Sadly, the police did do the search, but they didn't find anything. It didn't show any new leads or any information that they hadn't already had. So in 2012, the police did decide to rerun the DNA that was found in Patty's van. By now, DNA had come a long ways, and there was a lot of new updates and things, different ways that they could run the DNA. So when they did this, they did find traces of a female's DNA that was not Patty's. Now, the police did believe that they knew who this DNA had belonged to, but without probable cause, they couldn't really just like up and go ask somebody or like tell them to give them their DNA and force them to provide it. So sadly, that was kind of just left at that. Like, they now have this information, but there's again no way to be able to follow through with it. Now, police also did say, while JR is the main person of interest in the disappearance of Patty Vaughan, they think that he actually had an accomplice. So could it be that this female's DNA would be his accomplice? And the only thing that I can, like, in my brain can connect is, like, obviously a female that he trusted would have been his sister Marilyn, who is also super protective of him and also was all up in the police's business when they were searching the house. So I don't know, take from it what you will. I'm not like saying anything in concrete. I'm just saying in my mind, those are the things that connect and seem a little bit sus, you know? It would make a lot of sense. Like, you would have had to have harmed her or, you know, whatever, hurt her, taken her in the car, dumped her body, then gone and cleaned her car, and then taken her car and dumped her car on the side of the highway. But you're dumping the car on the side of the highway in the middle of the day. Like, it's like you could not have done this without somebody else. And I'm not pointing fingers at who it is, but whoever did it definitely didn't do it alone, you know? He asked his sister to take the kids for the day. Does that mean that she had more to do with it? A little while after, JR actually had ended up moving to South Texas, which is another reason that Patty's family thought it was a little suspicious, because could he have moved there, you know, just in case something had come up in the investigation? He was super close to the border, so he could have easily just crossed the border. Like, I don't know, their concerns and their suspicions definitely connect for me. So then a few years after that, he ended up moving all the way up to Colorado, where he did change his name and he actually got remarried, but then shortly after got divorced. Now, after, of course, his failed marriage in Colorado, he ended up moving to, wouldn't you know it, Boise, Idaho. I'm not saying he did anything, but honestly, just like all of the suspicion around this case, like, it is wild to me. Just, you could literally live next door to anybody. Anyways, to this day, he has not allowed his children to have any contact with Patty's family, not her sisters, not her parents or anything. Like, these are their blood relatives, and he has kept them away from them. And granted, like, they're my age, right? So like, obviously they have their own freedom, but you don't know what was said to them or how like their mom was perceived to them. They were babies when their mom went missing. So honestly, it's probably just awkward for them. Like, I get that. Like, it is so hard for me to reach out to my own family that I haven't seen since I was a child. But yeah, to this day, they have not had any contact with anybody in her family or from that time in their life. Patty's sister Janine did release a statement that says, you know, something along the lines of the fact that she loved those children, and it is heartbreaking to her that not only did she lose her sister, but she also lost those children. Like, those were her nephews and her niece, and she said that they were a lot like siblings to her. Like, keep in mind, she did live with them for a short time, and her sister was like her protector. So that was super heartbreaking for her, and at this point they really just want to be able to find justice for her, but most importantly, they just want to be able to lay her to rest. So yeah, as of right now, that is really just where this case leaves off. I would love to hear your guys' opinions on this. It is a interesting case. There's a lot of factors to it, and I really just kind of want to be able to see the discussion, kind of see the wheels turn of what you guys think might have happened or who might be involved. But for now, that's where I'm gonna leave it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys.